Hello, and welcome back to the Crime Reel. Over 7 days, there will be a true crime story in a different continent. Today is the first of 7. For today's true crime narration, we shall be visiting Antarctica, Earth's southernmost continent. Around 98% of Antarctica is covered in ice, with a population which fluctuates between around 1,000 to 4,500 people depending upon the season. This population is made up of scientists, research and support staff from across the globe. With such a small population, crime is incredibly rare, but isolation, boredom and alcoholism may have been known to play a part. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty means that any person accused of committing a crime on the continent would be subject to the laws of their home country. Our true crime story today looks at the life of Rodney Marks. Rodney David Marks was one of 3 children born to Paul and Ray Marks. He was born on the 13th of March 1968 in Geelong in Victoria, Australia. Rodney was an incredibly intelligent child who was hard-working and creative. He particularly loved surfing and music. When he was a teenager, he won a scholarship to a renowned private school where he continued to excel academically. He went on to study astronomy at the University of Melbourne, graduating with first-class honours. Then in 1993 he went to the University of New South Wales where he completed a doctorate in physics. For Rodney's thesis, he wrote at length about the South Pole, an area which he was particularly interested in. In 1997, Rodney was accepted for a position caring for an infrared telescope called Spirex at the South Pole. Due to the extremely bleak conditions and the level of isolation involved with this work, everyone selected had to go through extensive physical and psychological tests to ensure that they would be able to withstand the harsh, isolated winter. Once at the pole for the southern winter, around March to October each year, it is not possible to leave until the worst of the weather conditions subside. After completing the winter at the South Pole, Rodney was keen to return and was successful at securing a second position, this time working at the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station. This station is run by the National Science Foundation, a United States government agency. Rodney was scheduled to complete a year at the station from November 1999 to November 2000. He was an excellent scientist, holding a crucial position at the station. He was reportedly a well-liked, friendly man who enjoyed hanging out with his colleagues. Rodney played guitar in a heavy metal band that performed at the South Pole during the celebration of the new millennium, and over that winter period had dyed his hair purple. He enjoyed a drink and would drink to excess on occasion, something that was not uncommon with the employees at the station. He reportedly had a high tolerance and enjoyment of alcohol, but was not dependent on it. Through their mutual love of music, he became close with a woman by the name of Sonia Walter, who was a maintenance specialist at the station. They soon became romantically involved, and Sonia elected to stay for the winter season in order to continue their relationship. They seemed very happy together, and it was rumoured that they planned to marry when they returned home. As the winter began, in early 2000, many of the staff went home, leaving a skeleton staff of 50 people to continue their work through the winter months. On 11th of May 2000, Rodney was walking between the research building and the main station when he started to feel unwell. He met Sonia for dinner, but complained that he felt very ill and his eyes were becoming itchy and irritated. Rodney decided to get some rest in the hope that he would feel better the following day. However, his symptoms continued to increase. He was feeling feverish, sick, and had stomach pains. After a restless night, he visited the station doctor early the next morning. The doctor believed that the symptoms were related to Rodney's alcohol consumption and was not unduly concerned. Rodney returned to rest in his room, but started to become increasingly breathless, so once again visited the doctor, Dr. Robert Thompson. He decided to take a blood sample. The doctor noticed that there were already 2 fresh needle marks in Rodney's arm, but did not investigate this any further. The machine that may have been able to analyse Rodney's blood to see what was going on had not been correctly maintained, and as such was not working. The doctor remained none the wiser as to what was happening. Rodney became increasingly agitated and was struggling to breathe. The doctor consulted medical experts via a satellite call, but they still couldn't figure out what was going on. Then Rodney's breathing started to become slightly easier, and he tried to sit himself up. As he did so, he stopped breathing, and despite extensive CPR attempts, he could not be resuscitated. He died at approximately 6:45 p.m. that day. He was just 32 years old. It was assumed that he had died from unknown natural causes. With no way in or out for the remainder of the winter, Rodney's body had to be stored at the research station. His loss was devastating to the 49 other members of staff who worked alongside him. Many of his friends were unhappy with this temporary resting place inside the station, so they worked hard to construct a casket so that he could be temporarily laid to rest under the stars that he had gone to Antarctica to study. Memorial services were held at the South Pole Station, in Torquay, Australia, and in Boston. It wasn't until almost 6 months later that Rodney's body could be moved. He was flown to Christchurch in New Zealand on 30th of October 2000, and an autopsy was performed. This revealed that there were no drugs in his system at the time of death, only a trace amount of alcohol, but a huge amount of methanol. The results shocked everyone. Rodney had been poisoned. Methanol is a highly toxic chemical. It is colourless with a slightly sweet taste. It was determined that Rodney had ingested approximately 150 millilitres, roughly equivalent to a small glass of wine. As Rodney was an Australian citizen working at the US station, which was built on land claimed by New Zealand, both the US and Australia agreed to the inquest being held in New Zealand. The autopsy raised many questions. How did Rodney ingest that amount of methanol? Was it intentionally or accidentally ingested? Why were there needle marks in his arm? The theory that Rodney had killed himself was looked into. No one who knew him had sensed that he was depressed. By all accounts, he was happy, successful, had no financial concerns, was in love, and looking forward to a future with Sonia. Additionally, he sought medical help as soon as his illness started, and it was not thought that the panic he showed as his illness set in could have been faked. Rodney was an extremely intelligent man who would have known that drinking methanol in order to take his own life would have led to an incredibly painful, lengthy death. Suicide was therefore ruled out as a cause of death. The theory of him accidentally ingesting methanol when making his own alcohol was then pursued. This would again seem extremely unlikely due to his level of experience as a scientist, and that the methanol at the station was clearly labelled and kept in a locked cupboard. There was also a ready supply of alcohol available at the station, so there was no need for Rodney to secretly make his own. Rodney had been in extreme agony, but able to communicate for approximately 38 hours before his death. If he had known what was causing his symptoms, he would have been able to tell those helping him about it. Another possibility was that Rodney had been the victim of a prank which had gone wrong. Again, this theory was discounted because of the level of methanol consumed, making it extremely unlikely that this would have been used in a prank. It seemed that the most likely explanation was that Rodney had been murdered. With only 49 other people living at the station during those winter months, and no one else able to arrive at or leave the station, the list of potential suspects was already quite low. However, the investigation of a now 6-month-old murder case was problematic from the beginning. The official investigation was headed by Detective Senior Sergeant Grant Wormald at the New Zealand Police Department. The detective had to liaise with the National Science Foundation directly for the details of the 49 people who were present at the base at the time of Rodney's death. However, the Science Foundation were less than helpful. They had conducted their own internal investigation and concluded that Rodney had died from natural causes. It wasn't until 2006, 6 years after Rodney's death, that the National Science Foundation agreed to a questionnaire being sent to the 49 other employees. However, this was only sent on the basis that they approved all of the questions and participants informed that it was completely voluntary whether or not they completed it. Only 13 people responded. Many people critical to the inquiry did not complete the questionnaire. Why they chose not to respond is unknown. Were people scared of losing their jobs? Rumours have been circulating about marijuana being grown in the air ducts at the plant and the use of hard drugs within the station. We do not know whether these rumours are true, but perhaps this level of drug and alcohol abuse at a prestigious US facility was the reason for the covering up the circumstances of Rodney's death. Questions were raised over the doctor's procedures when treating Rodney. His location has been unknown since 2006. The investigation stalled. There has been no known progress in the murder investigation since. The New Zealand investigation has never been closed. However, the likelihood of finding any new information nearly 20 years later in one of the remotest places on Earth seems extremely unlikely. Those who know the case have come to their own conclusions. A tragic accident? A prank gone wrong? Suicide or murder? Rodney is the only person to die under mysterious circumstances on the continent of Antarctica, and quite possibly their first and only murder. That concludes the story of Rodney Marks. Thanks very much for listening to that story. For those of you that have any comments, please put them down below. I always read them. If all goes to plan, I'll be back on Sunday at midday, Greenwich Mean Time, 7 AM Eastern Time. Thanks very much for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst, if there's any way you can share these videos, I'll be really grateful. Thanks to all you psters out there. Goodbye.